Evan Carter was the kind of man who knew how to make anyone feel special. When Caroline Mitchell met him at a friend's birthday party, he was all charm and compliments. He made her laugh, opened doors for her, and called her his forever after just a few weeks. Caroline, a 31-year-old nurse from Austin, Texas, had always been careful with love, but with Evan, everything felt different, safe, exciting, real. In the beginning, their relationship was perfect. He'd bring her lunch during long hospital shifts, surprise her with flowers, and tell her she was the only person who truly understood him. Caroline felt lucky, believing she'd finally found the man she was meant to spend her life with. But little by little, things started to change. Evan's compliments turned into small criticisms that seemed harmless at first. He'd say things like, "You'd look better if you lost a little weight," or "Why do you work so much? Don't you care about me?" Caroline would laugh it off, thinking he was just joking. But over time, those words began to stick. He started checking her phone, questioning her about male coworkers, and getting angry if she went out with friends. Every fight ended the same way, with him twisting things until Caroline felt like she was the problem. He'd apologize just enough to make her stay. "I only act this way because I love you," he'd say. "You're lucky I put up with you." And she believed him because she wanted to believe in their love. 5 years passed like that, full of small heartbreaks that she kept forgiving. She stopped dressing the way she liked because he said her clothes were too revealing. She avoided her friends because he called them bad influences. Slowly, her world became smaller, revolving around his moods and his approval. Caroline's family noticed the change. Her sister once told her, "He's not making you happy anymore." But Caroline defended him, saying, "He's just going through a rough time." Deep down, she knew something was wrong, but she didn't have the strength to walk away. The night things finally fell apart started like any other. Caroline came home after a long double shift, exhausted but happy to see him. But when she opened the bedroom door, everything she'd been ignoring came crashing down. Evan was in bed with someone else, her best friend, Tessa. The room spun. Caroline couldn't move or speak. Evan didn't even try to apologize. He just looked at her and said coldly, "Maybe now you'll learn not to push me away." Something inside her broke that night. She packed a small bag, walked out, and didn't look back. As she drove away, tears streaming down her face, she remembered the words he'd said so many times. "You'll never find anyone better than me." At that moment, she made a quiet promise to herself. One day, she'd prove him wrong. In the beginning, Caroline thought Evan's protectiveness meant he cared deeply. He'd call to check if she got home safely, text her goodnight, and always wanted to know where she was. It felt sweet at first, like he was looking out for her. But slowly, his questions turned into accusations. If she didn't reply fast enough, he'd say she was ignoring him. If she went out with coworkers, he'd get quiet and distant, making her feel guilty for wanting a life outside of him. Evan's tone changed over time. He started commenting on her appearance in ways that stung. "You're not dressing like a nurse anymore. You're dressing for attention," he'd say with a fake laugh. When she talked about taking an advanced certification course, he dismissed it, saying, "You already work too much. You're not built for leadership anyway." Caroline would force a smile and change the subject. She convinced herself he was just insecure or tired from work. The more he criticized her, the more she tried to please him. She'd cancel plans with friends to spend time with him. She'd change outfits if he didn't like what she wore. She even stopped talking about her goals because she didn't want to start another argument. Every decision she made seemed to revolve around avoiding his disapproval. Evan had a way of twisting things that made Caroline question herself. When he said hurtful things, he'd later blame her for overreacting. When she cried, he'd roll his eyes and tell her to stop being dramatic. He could be cruel one minute and loving the next, leaving her confused about what was real. She began walking on eggshells, afraid that one wrong word would set him off. Sometimes he'd disappear for a day or two, not answering calls or texts. Caroline would panic, thinking something had happened to him. Then he'd suddenly show up like nothing was wrong, acting charming and affectionate. "You worry too much," he'd tell her, laughing. But inside, she felt empty and used. Evan always found ways to make her feel responsible for his moods. If he lost his temper, it was because she pushed his buttons. If he ignored her, it was because she didn't appreciate him. Caroline tried everything, cooking his favorite meals, giving him space, staying quiet, but nothing ever seemed to please him for long. He made her believe she couldn't do better. "No one else would put up with you," he'd say with a smirk after an argument. Sometimes he softened it with, You know I'm the only one who truly gets you. But it still made her stomach twist. By then, Caroline felt trapped. She still loved him, but it wasn't the same love she started with. It was a love built on fear, guilt, and hope that maybe he'd change back into the man she first met. But deep down, she was starting to realize that man never really existed. That night changed everything for Caroline. She came home exhausted after a long double shift, her feet aching and her head heavy. All she wanted was to take a shower, crawl into bed, and finally sleep beside the man she still believed loved her. But when she pushed open the bedroom door, her whole world stopped. There they were, Evan and Tessa, her best friend, her closest person outside of him. Caroline stood frozen, unable to speak. Evan didn't even flinch. He looked at her like she was the one interrupting something ordinary, not like he'd just shattered her completely. He didn't apologize or try to explain. He just gave her a smug look and said, "See? This is what happens when you ignore your man." His voice was calm, almost bored, like he was teaching her a lesson. That sentence burned itself into her memory. Tessa scrambled for her clothes, mumbling something about it being a mistake, but Caroline barely heard her. She felt numb, no anger, no tears at first, just disbelief. Everything she had sacrificed, every time she had defended him, all felt meaningless in that one moment. She didn't yell or throw anything. She just turned, walked to the closet, grabbed a small suitcase, and started packing. Evan sat there, still watching her, like he didn't think she'd actually go. When she zipped the bag, he laughed and said, "You'll be back. You always come back." But she didn't. She left the keys on the table, walked out the front door, and didn't look back once. Outside, the night air felt cold and sharp against her face. She got into her car, drove to her sister's apartment, and finally let the tears fall. The next few days were a blur. She ignored every call from Evan and every message from Tessa. But when mutual friends started calling, she realized Evan had already begun spinning his story. He told everyone she'd gone crazy, and that she was jealous and obsessed. Some believed him. Others didn't know what to think. It hurt Caroline deeply, because he knew exactly how to twist things to make her look unstable. People she had known for years started pulling away. One coworker even asked her if she was okay mentally, repeating something Evan had said. That was the cruelest part, watching the man who broke her heart try to destroy her reputation too. Still, Caroline refused to respond. She stayed quiet, focusing on getting her life back together. Every time she wanted to defend herself, she stopped and reminded herself that truth didn't need to shout. She had left him, and that was already a statement. At night, when she lay in her sister's spare room, she replayed that moment, the smirk, the words, the betrayal. It hurt more than she could explain, but somewhere beneath the pain, a small spark began to grow. It wasn't revenge yet. It was survival, and the beginning of her strength returning. The months after Caroline left Evan were some of the hardest of her life. She felt lost, like she didn't know who she was anymore. Every morning, she'd wake up with a heavy heart, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. She replayed the past over and over, asking herself what she could have done differently. There were nights she couldn't sleep, nights when she cried quietly so her sister wouldn't hear. Even though she had escaped Evan, his words still echoed in her mind, that no one would ever love her, that she wasn't enough. Sometimes she almost believed him. She had spent years being told she was worthless, and it took time to silence that voice inside her head. Her sister encouraged her to go to therapy, and though Caroline was hesitant at first, she eventually agreed. The first few sessions were painful. Talking about the manipulation, the control, and the betrayal brought back memories she had tried to bury. But her therapist helped her see that what happened wasn't her fault. She began to understand how deeply Evan had damaged her sense of self-worth. Caroline threw herself into her job to keep her mind busy. She worked long shifts at the hospital, often volunteering for extra hours. Her patients became her focus. Helping others made her feel useful again. Slowly, she started to feel a little lighter. She bought herself new clothes, redecorated her small apartment, and began going out for coffee alone, something she used to fear doing. She was rebuilding piece by piece. One night, during a late shift in the emergency department, a group of firefighters came in after responding to a warehouse fire. Among them was Grant Sullivan, a tall man with kind eyes and a calm presence. He had minor burns on his arm, and Caroline was the nurse assigned to treat him. While she worked, he made her laugh with stories about his team and asked about her favorite movies. It was the first time in a long while that she laughed without forcing it. When she finished bandaging him, he said softly, "You've got a steady hand. You must be good at what you do." It was a simple compliment, but it made her heart tighten. She wasn't used to kindness without conditions. Over the next few weeks, Grant came back for follow-up visits, and each time, he found a way to make her smile. He never pushed, never flirted too much. He just showed up, consistent and genuine. Caroline appreciated that more than he knew. She tried to keep her distance at first, afraid of falling into another trap. But Grant wasn't like Evan. He didn't play games or make her doubt herself. He listened. He respected her space. And for the first time in years, Caroline began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Caroline and Grant started seeing each other more often, but everything about their relationship felt different from what she had known before. There were no games, no guessing, no fear of saying the wrong thing. He called when he said he would, showed up when he promised, and listened when she talked. With him, she didn't have to walk on eggshells or hide parts of herself. She could just be, and that was new to her. They took things slow. Grant understood that Caroline had been hurt deeply, so he never pushed her. He gave her time to trust again. On weekends, they went for long walks by the lake or cooked dinner together in his small kitchen. Sometimes they'd sit in silence, watching movies or reading. Even in quiet moments, she felt safe beside him. Little by little, Grant helped Caroline believe that love could be gentle. When she doubted herself, he reminded her of her strength. When she hesitated to make decisions, he told her he trusted her judgment. He celebrated her small wins, finishing a tough shift, standing up for herself at work, or finally laughing without hesitation. Grant had a calm, steady nature that grounded her. He didn't raise his voice, didn't mock her, didn't make her feel like she was too emotional or too much. Instead, he made her feel seen. Every time she looked at him, she realized she had never truly experienced real love until now. Love that healed instead of hurt. Caroline began to open up about her past, the pain, and how hard it had been to start over. Grant never pitied her. He just listened and said, "You didn't deserve that, but I'm glad you're here now." Those words stayed with her. For the first time, she didn't feel broken anymore. She felt valued. As months turned into years, their bond only grew stronger. They supported each other through long work hours and tough days. Grant would drop by the hospital sometimes with her favorite coffee just to make her smile. On her days off, she'd visit his fire station with homemade meals for his crew. Their lives began to blend naturally, without force or pressure. 2 years after they met, Grant took her on a weekend trip to the same lake they often visited. They walked along the water, talking about everything and nothing, until he stopped, reached into his pocket, and got down on one knee. "Caroline," he said softly, "you deserve peace, love, and laughter, and I want to spend my life giving you that." Tears filled her eyes before she could even answer. She nodded, whispering yes, through her tears as he slipped the ring on her finger. In that moment, all the pain of her past seemed to fade. She had finally found someone who didn't try to fix her, but loved her exactly as she was. Grant wasn't just better than Evan. He was everything she had once stopped believing existed. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Caroline's phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but she answered anyway, thinking it might be a patient's family or a hospital call. The voice on the other end was familiar, but it took her a few seconds to place it. It was Molly, Evan's younger sister. Caroline froze. She hadn't heard that name in years. Molly's tone was soft, almost shaky. "Caroline," she said, "I didn't know if I should call, but Mom passed away last night." For a moment, Caroline couldn't speak. Evan's mother, Linda, had always been kind to her. During the years she dated Evan, Linda had treated her like family. She'd cook her favorite meals, check on her when she worked long hours, and even call her my second daughter. The thought of her being gone hit Caroline hard. "I'm so sorry to hear that," Caroline said quietly, her voice trembling. Molly went on to explain that the funeral would be held later that week. Then she hesitated before asking, "It would mean a lot if you came. Mom always loved you. She talked about you all the time, even after you and Evan split." Caroline didn't know how to respond. The idea of seeing Evan again made her stomach twist. She hadn't thought about him in months, not really. Her life was finally peaceful, and the thought of facing her past felt heavy. Still, she couldn't ignore the memory of Linda's kindness. "I'll think about it," she said softly before hanging up. That night, she told Grant about the call. He listened without interrupting, his expression calm. When she finished, he took her hand and said, If you want to go, I'll go with you. You don't have to face that alone. Caroline looked at him and felt a wave of gratitude. She remembered how alone she had felt years ago, and now she wasn't. After thinking it over for a day, she decided to attend. It wasn't for Evan. It was for the woman who had once made her feel seen when no one else did. The following week, Caroline and Grant drove to the small town where Evan's family lived. The closer they got, the heavier the air felt. She hadn't been there since the night she left. Every road, every turn brought back old memories she thought she had buried. As they approached the church, Caroline's hands trembled slightly, but Grant's hand in hers gave her strength. She took a deep breath, reminding herself why she was there, to pay her respects, not to relive the past. When they parked and stepped out, she saw familiar faces from years ago. Some people recognized her instantly, whispering as she walked by. And then, standing near the church doors, she saw him, Evan. He looked older, thinner, and tired. Their eyes met for just a second before he looked away. Caroline's heart raced, but she straightened her shoulders. She wasn't that broken woman anymore. She was someone new, someone free. Caroline walked into the church with Grant quietly beside her, his hand resting gently on the small of her back. Immediately, she felt the weight of the stairs. Whispers moved through the room like a wave. Some were surprised to see her after all these years, others curious about the man next to her. At the front of the church, Evan sat with his head bowed. When he looked up and saw Caroline, his expression shifted. First, there was the pale shock of grief, but then it flickered into disbelief as his eyes caught the glint of her engagement ring. He blinked, almost as if he didn't recognize her, and his mouth opened slightly before closing again. Caroline didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She was focused on the service, on honoring a woman who had once been like a second mother to her. She moved through the pews with calm confidence, accepting quiet nods and murmured condolences from family members who remembered her fondly. She didn't flinch at the whispers, didn't answer any pointed looks. She simply stayed composed, her posture straight, her gaze serene. The contrast between her calm and Evan's unease was stark. He shifted in his seat multiple times, trying to keep his attention on the service, but his eyes kept flicking to her. Grant, ever patient, stayed close, offering quiet reassurance with a gentle squeeze of her hand. She felt grounded with him, steady in her resolve. She wasn't there to relive the past or confront Evan. She was there to pay respect and to honor a woman who had once cared for her. The priest spoke about life, love, and the impact of a kind soul, and Caroline listened, absorbing every word. She allowed herself a few tears, not for Evan or for old wounds, but for the memories of kindness and warmth she had experienced with his mother. For a brief moment, the pain of betrayal felt distant, replaced by gratitude for those few people who had shown her genuine care. When the service ended, Caroline and Grant made their way outside, joining the small crowd that had gathered near the church doors. Evan was waiting, adjusting his jacket, trying to mask the unease that Caroline knew all too well. He took a deep breath, attempting a confident tone. "Caroline, I didn't expect to see you here." She turned to him slowly, her expression calm but firm, letting him take in the sight of her happiness, her engagement, the life she had rebuilt. She said nothing immediately, letting the silence speak for her. Evan's gaze flicked from her face to the ring on her finger. The disbelief and unsettled tension in his eyes were impossible to miss. Grant stood slightly behind her, protective but composed. Caroline's heart beat steadily. For the first time in a long time, she realized she didn't fear him. She didn't need his approval. The man who had once controlled her didn't hold any power over her anymore. Today, she was free, and she carried herself with a strength that spoke louder than words ever could. Evan took a step closer, his face twisting into a sneer. "Wow," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "You didn't waste any time. Who's this guy?" His eyes flicked to Grant, scanning him up and down, clearly trying to find something to mock. Caroline stayed calm. She met his gaze and smiled softly, not with fear or anger, but with quiet confidence. "The man you said I'd never find," she replied. The words hung in the air, simple but heavy, carrying years of pain, heartbreak, and finally triumph. Evan's mouth opened, as if he wanted to argue, but the next words he spoke were full of his usual condescension. "You really think he'll stay when he really knows you?" he asked, voice low but sharp. He was trying to shake her, to make her doubt herself, but this time, it didn't work. Grant moved slightly forward, positioning himself between Caroline and Evan, but he didn't raise his voice or show anger. He just said firmly, She doesn't need to prove anything to you. Not anymore. His tone was calm, steady, and protective. Every word carried the weight of truth, and Caroline felt a sense of relief and strength wash over her. Around them, people started to notice the tension. Evan had always commanded attention with his arrogance, but now he looked small and unsure. The confident mask he had worn for years was slipping, and Caroline realized for the first time that she held the power in this moment. Caroline took a deep breath, standing taller, feeling the freedom she had fought so hard to achieve. She didn't need to explain herself, justify her choices, or defend her happiness. Grant's presence gave her courage, but it was her own strength, her own journey of healing, that made Evan falter. Evan's face changed, a mix of frustration, disbelief, and maybe even regret flashing across his features. He opened his mouth, probably trying to come up with another cutting remark, but no words came out. The quiet was heavy, full of meaning. For the first time in years, he didn't control the room. He didn't control her. Caroline looked around, seeing the subtle nods from people nearby. Some sympathetic, some curious, all aware of the silent confrontation unfolding. The moment was quiet, yet it spoke volumes. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it didn't need to be. The power was in the stillness, in the finality of her words and her composure. Evan stepped back slightly, his confidence gone. Caroline didn't gloat, didn't mock him. She simply stood there, holding Grant's hand, smiling softly, carrying herself with dignity. The past was behind her, and in that moment, she realized the true meaning of freedom. She had survived, she had grown, and she had finally reclaimed her life. The confrontation was over. Evan said nothing more. Caroline knew that this was her victory, quiet, firm, and undeniable. She didn't need his acknowledgement. Her life, her love, and her peace were enough. And for the first time in years, she felt completely untouchable. After the service ended, Caroline lingered near the grave for a few quiet moments. The morning air was cool, and the sunlight filtered softly through the trees surrounding the cemetery. She knelt down and placed a small bouquet of flowers on the freshly turned soil. Her fingers brushed the petals gently as she whispered, "Thank you for loving me when he couldn't." It felt like more than just a farewell. It was a thank you to the woman who had once seen her worth, who had treated her like family when no one else did. Caroline felt a wave of calm wash over her. The weight of years of heartbreak, betrayal, and doubt seemed to lift just a little with that simple gesture. Grant squeezed her hand, standing quietly by her side, offering steady support without interrupting the moment. Caroline looked at him and smiled, a smile filled with gratitude and peace. He was part of her present, her future, and she felt that everything she had endured had led her here, to someone who loved her unconditionally. As they turned to leave, Caroline held Grant's hand firmly, walking slowly down the path that led away from the grave. With each step, she felt lighter. She didn't glance back at Evan, who stood a short distance away. She didn't need to. The man who had once tried to control her, manipulate her, and make her doubt her own worth no longer held any power over her. Evan watched them walk away, his expression unreadable. For the first time, he saw clearly the woman he had once underestimated. She carried herself with quiet confidence, with a dignity he had never respected when he had her in his grasp. And now it was too late. He could see that she had moved on, that she had found happiness and strength without him. Caroline didn't feel anger, spite, or revenge in that moment. She felt freedom. Freedom from the years of manipulation, from the lies, from the constant fear of disappointing someone who had never truly loved her. Every step she took beside Grant reminded her that her life was hers to live, her choices hers to make. By the time they reached the car, Caroline took a deep breath, letting the crisp air fill her lungs. She looked over at Grant and felt a quiet joy settle in her chest. She had survived the worst of her past and emerged stronger, wiser, and ready for the life she deserved. Evan remained behind, watching, realizing for the first time that the woman he had broken could never be broken again. She had learned, she had healed, and she had found love that respected and cherished her. Caroline slid into the car, Grant closing the door gently behind her. As they drove away, the cemetery faded behind them, just as the pain of her past began to fade with it. In that moment, she knew she was free. Free from him, free from the past, and free to step fully into a future she had chosen for herself. Looking back on everything, Caroline realized just how much she had grown because of Evan. The years of manipulation, the lies, the betrayal, as painful as they had been, had forced her to confront herself. She had learned to set boundaries, to recognize her own worth, and to stand up for herself. Without that heartbreak, she might never have discovered her own strength, never realized how capable she was of rebuilding her life from the ground up. For a long time, she had blamed herself, wondering if she had been too trusting, too naive. But now she saw the truth clearly. Evan's cruelty was not a reflection of her, it was a reflection of him. She understood that the challenges he had thrown in her path had shaped her into someone stronger, more self-aware, and able to love in a healthy, genuine way. Caroline often thought about what she would say to anyone going through a similar experience. Sometimes, she told herself quietly, the worst people in your life push you toward the best version of yourself. It wasn't easy to see it in the moment. Pain always feels permanent at first. But now, looking back, the lesson was undeniable. Those struggles had forced her to rise above fear, doubt, and heartbreak. She also realized that closure didn't come from revenge. The funeral had been her chance to say goodbye properly, to honor the woman who had cared for her without holding grudges or anger. She hadn't gone there to humiliate Evan, to make him feel small, or to prove anything. She went because she needed to close that chapter on her own terms, with grace and dignity. Yet, in that quiet, peaceful act, there had been an unexpected side effect. Walking into the church with Grant by her side, fully confident and happy, had shown Evan, without a single harsh word, just how far she had come. That sight alone, seeing her radiant and free, had been a subtle but undeniable justice. She realized that sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't cruelty. It's thriving, it's happiness, and it's walking away from people who tried to break you. Caroline now carried that lesson into every part of her life. She approached work with more confidence, treated her relationships with care, and never allowed anyone to belittle her again. She learned to listen to herself, trust her instincts, and prioritize her own peace. Even though the past still lingered in memories, it no longer held power over her. She had transformed pain into growth, betrayal into awareness, and heartbreak into strength. And as she looked at Grant, the man who loved her fully, without judgment or control, she smiled. She knew that her journey had brought her here, to a place of true love, freedom, and self-respect. In the end, Caroline didn't just survive her past. She had risen above it. She had turned the worst experiences of her life into the foundation for her best life. And that realization, quiet, powerful, and final, was the lesson she would carry with her forever.